Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for persisting with the rain and thank you for joining us for this session. As was just mentioned there, from worthy to irresistible, the rise of women's sports. We're 16 days away from the FIFA Women's World Cup. We're already in the midst of Wimbledon, and just to give you an update, rain has stopped playing. Katie Bolton's going to be playing a little bit later on. And of course, in the middle of the women's Ashes. I won't be talking about the men's Ashes as we're currently 2-0 down, and I certainly won't be referring to the moment of Johnny Bairstow. And at the end of the month, we've got the Netball World Cup. I think it'd be fair to say, or arguably fair to say, that this could be one of the most momentous and greatest months that we've ever seen globally for women in sport. I'm Ugo Monye. I'm a former rugby player that played for Harlequins, for England, the British and Irish Lions. I'm a father of two, and I'm really passionate about women's sports. Over the last couple of years, I've been a trustee for the Women's Sports Trust. It's a charity that was founded in 2012 and really serves a purpose to create greater viability, visibility, as well as celebrating the excellence of elite women in sport. I'm also joined by Claire Kelly from Gemba and John Long from Onside, and they're going to be sharing some of the research which they've done in collaboration with Women's Sport Trust. And today we're going to see it for the very first time, so a little bit of an exclusive for you. You'll all remember the hello. Yes. You'll all remember the impact from the Euros and the Lionesses roaring louder than they've ever roared before. When you look at the data from it, the tournament overall saw a TV total reach of 27.4 million. It was streamed 18 million times on BBC iPlayer, BBC Sport app, as well as the BBC Sport website. And we saw a TV peak audience of the final of 17.4 million. I think it'd be fair to say that it was quite a successful tournament for everyone involved. Well, that was the international circuit on the women's stage. What about domestically? Well, in 2022, it was a record year domestically for women's sport in the UK. With 37.6 million people watching women's sport, with an average viewing time per person, women's sport on TV increased year by year by 131% just last year. And I think it'll be fair to say that momentum has really continued into 2023. As I've already introduced Claire as well as John, they're going to be speaking. Claire's going to come up first, and Claire's really going to reach out and share some of the data and hopefully offer some opportunities and some thought-provoking thoughts as to what we can do and how we can better serve our sports fans. So without further ado, please give a generous warm welcome to Claire.
Thanks very much, Ugo. Hi everyone, I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the findings of our recent research with the Women's Sport Trust. Today we're going to focus on the women's sport fan landscape, looking at how we grow the fan base, how we deepen their engagement, and how we unlock their spending power. So starting off with growing the fan base. First of all, a bit of context. So what we've done is segment the UK sports fan base into 4 groups: committed fans, casual fans, occasional fans, and non-fans. And a committed fan is defined by someone who is passionate about a sport, who tell us that they're 5 out of 5 on a passion scale, and who also consume over an hour of live content a week in sport. So relatively hardcore sports fan. And you can see on the left-hand side that we've got 6 million UK committed women's sports fans, compared to 16 million committed men's sports fans. So there's real headroom to grow that women's sports fan base as it currently stands. And you can see on the left-hand side in the column here that the way we grow that fan base is by converting non-fans into occasional fans into casual fans, and ultimately casual fans into committed fans. And our research has shown that the key lever to pull is actually to move men's sports fans into women's sports fans. So it's really fans that are already engaged in the sports category and just increasing their advocacy and interest in women's sport alongside men's sport. A little bit about who these groups are. So on the left-hand side, actually there's not a huge amount of difference in affluence or income between committed women's fans and committed men's fans. But what you do see on the right-hand side is that the committed women's sports fan has more control of the household budget. They're more likely to have that financial control, which makes them really appealing and really exciting as a prospect for a brand and a sponsor to unlock. So then looking more closely at how we deepen fan engagement. The key point here is that at the moment, women's sports fans aren't as dialed in as men's sports fans to the content that they're consuming and watching. Part of this is due to supply, but it's also actually to do with the type of content that's available at the moment to the women's sports fan. They're looking for more innovation in the broadcast, and they're also looking for a greater variety of non-live sports content. So we started off by looking at the number of hours of content that was being consumed by the different fan bases. So on the left-hand side, you can see that committed men's sports fans are currently consuming 8 hours of content a week, compared to 6.2 hours for committed women's sports fans. So there's a 2-hour gap of headroom there that we can drive in women's sports fans. And the dark green boxes here is live content. So you can see actually at the moment, women's sports fans aren't consuming as much live content as men's sports fans. So as I mentioned, some of that will be to do with supply, but some of it is actually being driven by interest. We just haven't yet got the women's sport fan as dialed in to live content as the men's sports fan. So there's some great opportunities to look at the broadcast and look at innovation around the broadcast to drive that interest. And actually the same applies with non-live content as well. So what we've got here is we've got 58%, so over half of committed women's sports fans saying that they wish there was more non-live sports content available to them. They're looking for that market, they're looking for that content that can unlock their fandom. And on the right-hand side, nearly half of that same group are saying that it's difficult to know where to find that content. So they're looking for it, but they can't find it. So again, there's a real opportunity to make sure that that content is not only relevant, but is also front and center in terms of accessibility. And so then taking a look at the type of content that this fan group is interested in. On the left-hand side, you can see what committed men's sports fans are interested in. So best shots, goals, highlights, gameplay, tactical analysis, statistics. What we saw coming through with women's sports fans, that it was quite player-centric, so really interested in the athletes themselves, their skills, but also their personalities and their stories. I think from a live broadcast perspective and a non-live content perspective, that's really exciting. There's some great narratives that you can start to tell about the athletes themselves, how they became where they are today, and what they have to do in training and what they're doing in and out in between matches that can really engage that fan base more. And to that point on ease of access, what we see here is actually those dark green boxes, which are about the athlete. They're actually really difficult, or quite difficult, for the women's sports fan to find relative to the men's sports fan. So as an example, if you look at stories on team players and rivalries, you see that actually 48% are saying it's easy to access that content, so less than half of the women's sport fan base, whereas 61% of men's sports fans feel that. So actually we're underserving our women's sports fans at the moment, not just through content availability, but through content access. And you see the same applies to player skills. So 70% of men's sports fans are saying it's easy to find player skill content, but only 58% of women's sports fans are saying that. Finally, looking at how we start to unlock the spending power of our committed sports fans and committed women's sports fans. So, starting context, we asked committed women's sports fans whether they thought that sport should be on free-to-air. And the majority said yes, they agreed. Women's sport should be on free-to-air. However, we did then say, would you be interested in paying for a dedicated women's sports channel? And actually 40% of that powerful group said yes, that they would be willing to pay for a channel. And actually the number that they came out with was relatively consistent, around £7 between the different fan groups. And really encouragingly, the majority, if not all of this group, were already paying for a sports subscription. So that behaviour and that habit was already existing with this group. And they're just saying actually they'd be prepared to add a channel to their basket if it was focused on women's sport. So to sum up before I hand over to John, there are 3 things that I've talked to you about today: growing the fan base, which one of the key levers is through converting more committed men's sports fans into the women's sport category, deepening their engagement. So from the live broadcast perspective, thinking about innovation around the broadcast, and non-live content, thinking about players themselves, the rivalries, the controversies, the stories, and their skills. And then finally, investigating opportunities to unlock that fantastic spending opportunity that we have with the women's sports fan, potentially through a dedicated channel. Thank you. I'll hand over to John now.
Thank you, Claire. So, for almost 2 decades, I've been persuading brands to invest in women's sport. And it's been hard work. That process began 2 decades ago with an emotional plea. Please invest in women's sport. Over time, gender equity has become a bit of a rallying cry. And we see more brands come in, particularly pre-existing sponsors of men's sport. But today, finally, building on the audience data that Claire has presented and the insights there, the narrative begins to shift for me, because today we're releasing fresh data that shows both the success that brands are having in sponsoring women's sport and also the low risk, high return opportunities that are available to others. Now, there's a full 50-page report that will be available for download from the Women's Sports Trust website today. And I think that will appeal to the instincts of marketers, but also help you to tell your CFOs and your CEOs why it's a good thing to invest in, as opposed to other marketing opportunities. And so over the next few minutes, all I'm going to do is fly through a few quick headlines. The first and foremost, I'm going to start at the very top of the marketing funnel. Sponsorship of women's sport is delivering on awareness. 1 in 4 adults are now aware of those major women's sports sponsorships. So O2's partnership with the Red Roses, the England women's rugby union team. Nike's partnership with the England women's football team. And Barclays' title sponsorship of the Women's Super League. 1 in 4 adults there aware of those partnerships. The reach of those partnerships is as large as some of the major men's sport partnerships now. So it's a real opportunity to garner a wide reach. But these partnerships also drive other important brand metrics. They're driving awareness and consideration to very high levels as well. We tested 18 women's sports sponsorships as part of this research and found improved affinity amongst those that were aware of the sponsorships, averaged out at 48% of those women's ones. And to Claire's point about how committed fans are interested in the athletes, we found those sponsorships that involve athletes enjoy even higher levels of affinity. Now, we looked at some of the major ones like those O2 and Barclays ones that I mentioned earlier, but we also looked at a couple that were slightly out of the box partnerships. Partnerships like Gucci with Leah Williamson, the England football captain, and Il Maquillage, the official beauty partner of Arsenal women. And we found that those slightly left field ones score even higher on those affinity metrics, presenting a real opportunity for new brands that perhaps haven't even been involved in men's sponsorship before to think about sponsorship as part of the marketing mix. As well as affinity, consideration also follows that similarly positive pattern. So over 1 in 4 of those that are aware of those best performing partnerships are also thinking more positively about that sponsoring brand and more likely to buy from that sponsoring brand as well. These metrics of affinity and purchase intent are higher for women's sport than they are for men's sport. Not just amongst women, not just amongst young people, but across all age groups and all income brackets. Furthermore, 6 in 10 people believe that brands should invest in both women's and men's sport, and a similar proportion of people are of the view that promotion of these partnerships, if you are involved with the men's and the women's, should also be split equally. Sponsorships that address inequality of opportunities and provide equal support will help people feel more positively about your brand, particularly young people. Amongst the 18 to 24 cohort, that increases to 54% of those people who think that they will feel more positively in those cases. A good women's sports sponsorship, however, can be about more than promoting equity. Over half of young people and 8 out of 10 avid women's sports fans will feel more positively about brands that address barriers to participation, such as appropriate clothing for females and balancing sporting and family commitments at the same time. So there are really a broad number of ways in which consumers are looking for brands to activate in these areas. Importantly as well, consumers don't think sponsorship of women's sport is just about the very top of the pyramid. 7 in 10 adults want brands to encourage more young people to play sport through their sponsorships. So while you may be partnering with a major property, they want the activation of that to include young people as well. And when it does get to the top tier, driving media coverage, building excitement, and growing the fan base are all seen as really, really important. And indeed, as a brand, doing this will amplify the long-term returns that you receive from the partnership as you help build the property as well as your own presence. Finally, for now, comes activation, which frankly, to date in women's sports sponsorship, has been very focused on empowerment. Look at us, this is our diversity inclusion play. We're into women's sport as well as men's sport. But the good news for brands, based on our research and this new research we're releasing today, is that you can be far broader and we think far braver in your activation of women's sport than is generally the case that we see today. For example, fans of women's sport will look favorably on those brands who use sponsorships as a community, grassroots, or sustainability platform. While purpose-based activity can still work well for sponsors, so too can campaigns that draw on the excitement of women's sport and its current players and athletes, as Claire talked to earlier. So really that's about it for me for now. As I said, there's a treasure trove of over 50 slides of data available for download from today from the Women's Sports Trust. In summary, though, while for 20 years I've been trying to plead with people to invest in women's sport, today I feel I don't have to anymore. I feel that I can say with confidence that women's sports sponsorship in the UK today is an underpriced, low-risk, high-return marketing opportunity, which really puts it all over to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John and Claire. We've just got time just for a couple of questions. Hopefully, I'm going to be asking at least some of the questions that you may have had whirling through your head. So, Claire, I'm going to start with you. The first question off the back of what you've both presented is, why are women's sports fans a valuable audience, and where are the biggest opportunities to be able to get at them?
I mean, as John's just alluded to, I don't think it could be a more exciting time for women's sport and women's sport fans than it is right now. We're seeing incredible growth in the fan base. We're seeing an increased amount of engagement with the events that you've mentioned over the course of just the next month. There you go. There's more and more activation opportunities around women's sport. And the value of the fan is clear to see. They have financial control of the budget. There's a diverse range of demographics amongst that fan group, whether it be school-age children just starting to learn about sports and their engagement with it, and retirees who are engaging in the women's sports category, potentially for the first time, having engaged with men's sport previously. So there's a fantastic platform to engage these fans. And I think the opportunities, as we've seen, are through live content and non-live content, and around stitching together those athlete narratives and unlocking some of that to inspire fans across the board. So really, really great time to be a brand and to be a fan in women's sport.
John, you just mentioned there's loads more to digest, 50 pages worth, which you can get on the Women's Sports Trust website, Twitter, LinkedIn, to make sure that you get hold of that. But from the great research that you've done, what are the biggest takeaways for you, and what were the big themes?
So the first thing to say is I can relax now, because the information's there, right?
Yeah.
For 20 years, I've been trying to sell people on the benefits of women's sport, but now you can go and find that information. And really then within it, what you can find, no matter what type of brand that you are, is a place to play. So you go for an FMCG and you need a big mass audience, there are properties that you can go to that will give you that reach. But if you're a niche brand and you're a particular audience, whether that's a older adults or younger people, males or females, you can find that audience within women's sport, right? And the properties are there, and they're still, as I said at the end, they're underpriced.
On that point, what does the research show in terms of which rights holders and brands are doing best brand sponsorship in women's sport, and where do you think is the biggest room for improvement?
So the ones that are winning at the moment are those ones that are building awareness. So the big mainstream brands. Now, these are brands that already have experience in sponsorship. So it's O2, it's Barclays. They're doing really well. They're playing the same playbook for women's sport that they've done for men's sport in a lot of cases. Where the opportunity lies, I think, is the little insight you see there around Gucci, around Il Maquillage. These are brands that haven't been involved in sponsorship at all really before. They're now using women's sport because they can find the audience there, and they can target an audience, but it can deliver on affinity and consideration as well. So look at those examples and see how that might work for you would be my advice.
And Claire, just finally, if you're a brand, any final words on why pick women's sports sponsorship and other areas for potential investment?
Well, I mean, I come from a grocery retail background, and when I was at Sainsbury's, we would have done anything to get the level of loyalty, passion and engagement that you see in a sports fan. And so it's a no-brainer for a brand. This audience is there to be untapped. They're engaged, they're growing, they're crying out for brands to support them through their journey as a women's sports fan. So the platform's there to take, and the loyalties for all to see, whether it be the Women's Ashes that's happening this week or the Football World Cup that's coming up. It's a fantastic platform for a brand to engage with.
It certainly is. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for your patience, especially persisting with this British summer. Well, thanks to John as well as Claire, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.